I was still at UCLA as a grad student, and I was in my first year working on my PhD. I mean, I always knew I wanted to teach at the college level sometime, so I wanted to get those required degrees in early. And I just loved college, and I wouldn't let anybody tear me out of there. So I was still working on the PhD, but there was another student there, doctoral student there, whose stepfather was a director. And he asked, do you have anything? Do you have any stories? And I was working on something. I had a novella I was working on at the time. It was kind of, for the time, kind of an uppity romantic comedy. So I gave it to David E. Miller was the director, if anybody wants to look that one up in film history. He was a great studio, mainstream studio director, and did some really good work. But David really liked it, and he wanted to option it and work on it with me. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. And I was, what, 23, 24. I think I was 24 at the time. And that's why I never went back for the second year and beyond, and I never did my dissertation for the doctoral degree, because I was bought out of there and paid to write a screenplay. And I was 24 and maybe a little more cocky than I should have been. I figured I got this knocked, you know. I'm off and running. And, well, the first life lesson, it was to be another 8 years before I got my next assignment, my second assignment. But I was doing PhD in theater, so I had been writing stage plays for a number of years. But that's what it was. It was called The Menopause of Henrietta Luck, and it was a romantic comedy. I wasn't that optimistic. Optimistic, yes, you have to be to a certain extent, but I'm also a realist. I just knew I had to do it. And speaking of luck, Diane was another major, major part of my luck, because this lady took a chance, you know, that very, very few young, beautiful women, I think, would be willing to take on a guy from nowhere who said he was going to be a writer. Fat chance, right? But you know, put all her marbles on that, and she did. And it was an amazing journey, and that she took that chance was something. And I just kept working, and I started to get work. If you're a writer in any form, in any genre, if you're a writer, you're going to get kicked in the teeth. I mean, that goes with the territory. It's just, that's the way it happens. So you got to get used to certain things. You have to find that peace within yourself, and toughen your skin, get alligator hide, because it's coming, and it is going to come. And then you just try the best way possible that you know how to do to learn from it all. Learn from it all. And I was not I was a pretty shy kid, basically, is what it comes down to. I was not a tremendously outgoing person at that time. I hadn't mastered that skill yet. But I felt I had a plan. I knew I couldn't do it by bashing on doors, kicking doors down, pounding on tables, to exaggerate, to make a point. I wasn't one of those people. But what I could do is make myself inevitable by continuing to crank out original material. And that is exactly what happened. I just kept writing. And I just kept rewriting and rewriting until they were pretty darn good. So when opportunities came, as eventually they did, I was ready. I had scripts, different genres, you know, what do you want? What do you want to see? Ultimately, I ended up with a top, well, I'm not going to bandy names about it at this point, but a top agent, literary agent in Hollywood, which kind of changed everything and, you know, made other things possible. And it was just because I had a drawer full of scripts. I've written 17 feature screenplays for remuneration, on assignment, shall we say. Of those 17, 6 got made. Of those 6, I get screen credit on 5. Of the 5, I get shared screen credit on 3 and sole screen credit on 2. And the reason I like to run that down for people is that is a pretty typical career arc for a working screenwriter. It's not what a lot of people coming into the field think it's going to be. No, basically you end up making your living, and it can be at times a very good living, off of stuff that is never going to get made. Because whether it's made or not, those are financial decisions. Those are business decisions. And your original material you crank out can be very, very good and be a good work sample. But I have a number of scripts that were never made, never optioned, yes, but never made, because they were wrong in their timing for the business at that moment. So that's truly, I think, kind of a glimpse of the true nature of this business. I don't think it's changed too much since then. People need to know that, who are genuinely interested in and fantasize or see the possibility of them becoming screenwriters. They need to buckle down for the long haul, because that's what it is. People who want to pursue this, and I definitely understand it, because I got the bug early, and I knew I was a writer in the 4th grade. And I say, I didn't choose it, it chose me. And okay, so that fate question is decided, and we move forward and see where it takes you. But every writer who does not come from money, who does not come from great resources, as most of us do not, there are 2 tracks to your life. And the first is doing everything you can with who you are and your personality toward fulfilling the desire, the creative need to do these things and write these scripts. And maybe some of them will get made, and that's a separate discussion, maybe. But also the second track being, you have to find a way. You have to build for yourself, because nobody else is going to do it for you, an ongoing source of life sustenance separate from your creative career. You have to build that, I think, build that into your plan from the beginning. Because even when you do start getting hunks of money, it comes in hunks. And at times it can be wonderful, it can be very big hunks. But when that happens, you have to really know how to turn that money into income, indefinite income. I mean, I have so many friends. Of course, it's so hard, and you struggle, and all of a sudden you're making the big bucks, and your name is in Variety for a few times and all that. And so they run and say, I've worked so hard, I really deserve this. And they go up and buy the big house on the hill, which is certainly understandable. And 5 or 6 years later, they're selling it. They're desperate and selling it, and they lose it, because every year is not like that. It doesn't always rain gold coins in this business. It's going to be very sporadic. Take what you make, turn it into income. And that's what I did, what we did. I advise income real estate, but something so that you can have a life separate and assured. I mean, it depends. I mean, Diane and I, we wanted kids. When we had kids, pretty soon, pretty early on, and the responsibilities mount, and you got to do both. You got to do both, and it can be done that way. One of the first things that happens when anybody gets hired, on any level in Hollywood, it's an agency, it's a production company, usually in the first week or two, somebody drops by, you're juggling the coffee or whatever it is your task is, and they drop a script in front of you and they say, I read this over the weekend, tell me what you think of it on Monday. And it's all very casual and low-key, but the truth is, this is one of the most important moments of your professional life. Because how you respond to reading that script and how you speak of it afterwards will tell them a great deal about how useful or not you will be to a company going forward that is in the creative business. If I may throw a statistic at you, in 1946, just after World War II, at a time when only about 10% of the population, nation's population, went to college or could afford to go to college. The GI Bill hadn't kicked in yet, and started to change that. But in 1946, the general American population had a reading vocabulary of 25,000 words. Okay. That's not recognition. That is used in everyday conversation. A reading vocabulary, 25,000 words. By 1990, the average American had a speaking vocabulary of 10,000 words. And since then, I am sure it has declined precipitously since then. That is what happened. You read less, you just see images, you live through images, you use emojis to express emotion, and you don't need words, you don't have the subtlety of words or the variety of a vocabulary, and it limits, I believe, truly limits how people can think, even intelligent people, how completely they can think. And that's why reading actual words on actual paper is incredibly important for young writers. There is a major problem in the third act. I mean, this is getting pretty esoteric, but there's a major problem in the third act of Erin Brockovich, which there is a dramaturgical point that must happen in films that are going to connect with large audiences. And because of the circumstances, Erin Brockovich is a courtroom drama, really. It's about somebody suing somebody. So the big payoff moment, what's called the obligatory scene, should happen in a courtroom. But Erin Brockovich is not an attorney. So if it happened in a courtroom, the entire big moment would take place with Erin Brockovich just sitting there silently watching. And Susanna Grant recognized this, quite correctly so, that this was a big dramatic problem. So, like a really good screenwriter does, she found a way around that gave it the emotional punch, kept the focus on Erin, and gave it the sense of victory and emotion for the audience at the ending instead of the courtroom. We'd never go to the courtroom. Do you remember what they did?
I'm remembering certain scenes right now. Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Toward the end, she was running around getting everybody to sign up for it, because they had X%, 90% or something like that of all the people in the town. They had to sign this affidavit or something like that. And she comes back, and there's these two uptown uppity lawyers, and there's this funny scene where she basically lays out that she's saved the day. She's found the smoking gun, she's got the evidence, and it's turned into a moment of emotional victory for the hero with a substitute adversary. It's not, they're not the real adversary. PG&E is the real adversary.
Right.
I know this is kind of a subtle thing, but it is a remarkable piece of screenwriting to know that and to write it in such a way that it works.
Plus, she had been fighting that stereotypical uptown person throughout her working with Albert Finney, the looks that she would get, whether it was her fault for the way she was dressed and some of the comments, but she was fighting that same stereotype, so it was like a culmination of that at that moment. Yeah,
and
great.
They are a brilliant writer's substitute to provide the emotion that cannot, under these circumstances, because it's a courtroom drama and she's not a lawyer, but can provide the substitution of an emotional payoff for an audience. And it works. It works. To trace character growth, you have to, the writer doing it and anybody who wants to understand it, you know, when it works with other, you know, with other writers doing it well in other films, you have to go back to certain basic questions. And the one in Erin Brockovich is, what does Erin want? There is one thing, and that's what you have to, you know, condense it down to. Well, she wants this, she wants happy kids, she wants money, she wants... What does Erin inside, what does she want and need? And you boil that down. That's question number one. This is good in general kind of stuff when you're writing a character, a lead character, heroine, or hero, right? You've got to know certain things about what makes them tick. I would offer that what Erin Brockovich wants is to be taken seriously. Everything she does, everything she says, everything she goes back to, it is about being taken seriously. But then she finds out, as she goes along in her story, she's getting closer and closer to actually being taken seriously. It's costing her her family. She's losing her children and her children's connection to her because she doesn't have any time for them anymore. Remember her son, he's really getting kind of twisted out of shape, and you know, he's not happy with mom at all because she's not around anymore. So the hero's journey, emotionally, the inner journey, it always has to be hard. It always has to be difficult. And you have to be able to demonstrate it physically, visibly, to demonstrate it. And so you have to know what they want, and that has to come out, I mean, really want, their primary defining want as a human being. And you have to know their wound. Every character that works, and every character who has character growth, ultimately, has this deep inner wound. It usually takes place in the past, before the film begins, but not always. Sometimes in Finding Nemo, Merlin, who is the hero of that movie, the wound happens right at the beginning, when he loses his wife and 999 out of his 1,000 eggs to this barracuda or whatever fish, nasty fish, eats them all up, and this is his tragedy. But the wound then defines that character for the rest of the movie until they are able to move beyond it. The wound is when a person has a wound going that deep, even, you know, in reality, let alone, you know, in fiction, they tend to insulate themselves and defend themselves by creating this shield between themselves and the world, so nothing that horrible or that painful can ever happen to them again. That's usually when we meet them toward the beginning of the story. This person who is isolated, emotionally isolated behind a shield. And the journey toward character growth is them figuring out that they have to get away from the shield. They have to lay down the shield and face the potential hurt and pain in the world in order to connect with humanity and lead a full life, you know, to connect with Earth again, people, and really live a complete life rather than just be caged up and, you know, and be gone and never have connected with anybody else. And that is what has happened to Erin. She is behind the, remember, you have the scene, this is still in Act 1, I think it is, and she's got the tiara, and she's doing her speech because she was Miss somebody, Miss Wichita or something like that, right, at some point. And she said that, I thought I was going to be somebody. I thought I was going to be able to do something. And then she found out that she was just treated like a dumb broad, opening chain stores, department stores, and they didn't expect anything of her, and they didn't want anything of her. They just wanted her to stand there and look pretty, and that was her wound. She didn't see that. I mean, she originally saw that as her opportunity to break free and, you know, be who she knew she could be. But Didn't work. So now, in her life, while she's desperately trying to put food on the table for her kids, she is also desperately seeking a way to get people to take her seriously. And that's a wonderful place to start character growth. It really is. Some of the students are a bit cynical about my lack of cynicism about Hollywood and movies that make a great deal of money. But I just point out that what money means is this film touched untold millions of people where they live. It gave them some form of a rewarding emotional experience. They got what they came for. A storytelling here, an instance of storytelling, it worked. And that's what we need to learn how to do, because that's a language and a craft and a ritual that can be mastered. These comments that flow into things, I think it was one of your clips, and somebody down there was saying, "I hate plot, you know, I want story." And that poor person obviously is not educated about these things, because plot and story are the same bloody thing. They are. A story is plot. Plot is story. Maybe we can get there in a minute or two. But make those mistakes, and that's just ignorance, you know. And you can get educated, and you can learn the tools and how to use them. It is to be out there, say, I'm going to create this beautiful, big, intricate thing, and not know the pieces of it. It's like going to say, I'm going to create this big, beautiful house, and I know absolutely nothing about cement, electrical cabling, roofing shingles, glass, or you got to know all these things before you can build a house. And I believe the same is true for really good screenwriting. Did you know, for instance, that there are only 4 viable goals in all of narrative screenwriting?
And those goals are, yeah?
Win, stop, escape, or retrieve. So, okay, you've got an idea for a character, your hero or heroine. Great, you've got an idea. And they have, okay, now what is it they want? Well, they've got to have a goal to pursue, right? Well, it has to fall into the category of win, stop, escape, or retrieve. Now, these are big categories, and there are many versions of each one, many permutations of each one. So it's not like it's that cut and dried, but it will appear to a lot of people like that's too cut and dried for me. But the point is this: there's only those 4 because those 4 share something in common. They all provide a visible, physical, 3-dimensional goal for a motion picture that will result in a physical climax and obligatory scene. It precludes the use of internal goals, and that's one of the things people have to get over. An internal goal, that's great, and it is separate from what drives the movie. You need a physical, visible goal. Each one of those 4 goals has a finish line, a visible finish line. And a goal like, well, they want to feel better about themselves. That doesn't work on film. It just doesn't work. There are only 4 emotions. Mad, sad, glad, and scared. You haven't heard that one?
No.
Again, they are, you know, there's a lot of variations between mad, sad, glad, and scared. There's many permutations and dimensions there. But the way they are useful is like this. If you are building, if you're outlining something, a section, a particular section, hero goal sequence, or a particular scene, the thing is, the way you guarantee that it's going to have conflict and change in it, and change is one of the single most important. We could talk about that in a minute too. Change is the power that makes screenplays either work or not work. You got to quantify it, but it can be done wonderfully. That if the hero, lead character, walks, stomps, jumps, falls into a scene, and they are either mad, sad, glad, or scared, by the end of the scene, they have to be one of the others. If they're mad when they show up, they have to be scared when they walk away. Or if they're scared when they show up, they have to be glad when they walk away, because that guarantees dramatic change within the scene. And it's a way of checking yourself, because we read a whole lot of scenes which are just talk. And they're the same, everything is the same at the end as it was at the beginning, and that is not a viable scene for visual storytelling. There are 14 character categories that advance and serve story. Story is a central character, hero or heroine, who undertakes to do something, physically do something, in order to achieve a visible physical goal by the end, kind of stuff. Right? And in that pursuit, there are 14 other character categories who serve as either helpers or hinderers toward that hero. And they are, I mean, like, first of all, I mean, the main categories are hero and adversary. Ooh, adversary is much unsung and underappreciated. The adversary is critical, and the point, I mean, without conflict, you don't have a story. There is no story without conflict. That's just it, you know. So that adversary is key to the creating of conflict, and so it puts a lot of weight on who the adversary is. So you got hero, adversary. Then there is a mentor, a very wide and delicious category, you know, goes back to Joe Campbell and the assessment of the mythological approach stuff. There's some of those characters. I mean, he called the adversary the shapeshifter. That's some more specific usage. Yes, it's adversary. Shapeshifter is somebody who appears one thing on the outside and becomes something else. That is one kind of adversary, but not the only kind. So, and then there's mentor. There's the love interest character. This is interesting, the love interest character. I really go into this in detail for folks. For some, I mean, the love interest character brings depth and humanity and helps, augments, and eases character growth forward for the central character. And it is the least used character category of all the grad students who pass through here.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's the character, it gets too close to home. Maybe their experience, you know, in these things, emotional, sensual experience is highly limited or something. What it is, something about it, but that is a key character in stories that work, and you have a romance subplot, that love interest character. Whoa, when it's done well, it's one of the most powerful things you can add to a story. And then there are helper, follower, allies, and a sidekick. Sidekick is another category. Very specific function is played by the sidekick. And others. There is the adversary agent. See, there is one adversary. Adversary can only be one person, human being, or a personified thing, a monster that behaves like a human being and thinks like a human being, but one thing, one human being. But they can also have all kinds of adversary agents running around doing the bidding of the adversary. There's a group of characters called gate guardians, and that's, I would put those people in the gate guardian category. Gate guardian is a character who, this is from Campbell and the mythological structure too. Gate guardian is a character who, when first met by the hero, when first confronted by the hero, stops them, says, no, you cannot enter here. But once the hero finds a way to outsmart that gate guardian, it's never brute force, it's when they outsmart them and find a way to get around them and continue their journey, after that the gate guardian becomes an ally.
Interesting. Okay.
At first opposes and then assists. And a few more. There's a few more in there too. But the point is, all of these characters, there's only 14 that help you create a plot, that help move a story forward. And any other character that a particular writer wants to plot, you know, I really like this character. You know, they're kind of interesting and peppy and zippy and they talk funny and I like it. if they do not serve the story, if they do not help drive the plot forward, get rid of them, axe them, cut them, lose them, because they have to serve a function. Every time I walk into the class, the first evening, all our classes are evening classes, and in the new class, the first year people there for the first semester, and I walk in, and they're chattering away and trying to get to know each other and so forth, but they haven't, really had anything to do with me yet. And I walk in. It was always weird and creepy, because as soon as I walk in, deathly silence falls. Everybody's waiting, So I look very austere and serious, and I walk to the whiteboard, and I write on the whiteboard in very, very large letters, "Write badly with pride." And then they laugh. Everybody laughs, and it cuts the ice, and it works that way. And I turn around and I smile and I say, "Yes, but I'm not kidding." For it is a critical importance for writers to permanently give themselves permission to write badly. Writer's block is all about expecting and demanding of oneself perfection. Anything, any word, any sentence, it's got to be great. It's got to be great. No, that way lies writerly death. You do that, you'll end up freezing so solid, you'll never write again. It is exactly the opposite. Writing is a craft. It's a craft, and how do you participate in a craft? It's a craft that's exercised with words, and it is like in I don't know, statuary or something. You start out with a big gooey pile of wet clay, and you start to mush it. You get your hands dirty, you get down in the mud and you mush it and squish it, and then you start making choices about, as you shape it, the pieces you're not going to need, and so forth, and you go from there. But you start out with mess. That's what we do as writers. We start with mess, and then we make choices. First hundreds of choices, and then thousands of choices, and before we're done, tens of thousands of individual choices have been made. But you cannot make choices, and you cannot see or choose what direction you want your story to go in, or how you want it to develop, unless you have a pile of words on the page. So we have exercises sometimes. Just let's try it. Let's write as badly as we know how. And it's funny, you read them aloud, everybody gets a laugh, and kind of stuff. And what they find out is, even when they are trying to write badly, because that's what we're doing, it's this little exercise, it still comes out funny. It's not bad, in other words. They're funny, they're cute, they're weird, they're quippy. But even writing badly, they're not really writing that badly at all. Writers never write alone, never. But we spend a lot of time alone in the writing process. But once we have something, then we have to, and this is important to new writers everywhere, you have to have a circle of people whose opinion of material you trust. It's one of the things that happens in our program. These people make friends for life, because then they rely on each other's judgment, because everybody knows everybody's opinion grows to become quite sophisticated about the material. And you can always call up one of your buddies and say, you want to do a script swap. You read mine, I read yours. And what you get back frequently is not what you want to hear. We're all children. We all want to say, "Oh, that is the greatest thing. Isn't that great?" And that's never what you hear. So you're always eternally disappointed. So you hear objective, good criticism of what you've got. And I always tell them 48 hours. Don't do anything for 48 hours. Suffer, fine, stay in bed, whatever you need to do in response to what you've heard about your material. And then sit down and read it again, cover to cover. And it will be revealed to you through someone else's point of view what you really have. And all of a sudden it's time to start editing again and rewriting again. You will get it. And that is, what has happened there is the cycle of subjective work to re-objectification. Because the more you work on something over time, the more you are in it. You are drawn into it, and it becomes within you, and it is about you, and you think you're doing something great. And then you take it out, and you get a slap in the face or two. It clears your eyes, it clears your vision very, very well. You become re-objectified, and you approach the material again with clean eyes for another go-round. And in my experience, if you really want good material, and I'm assuming we all do, there's some who just want pats on the head and all kind of stuff, but if you really want the material to be good, you have to go through that cycle: subjectivity, re-objectification, subjectivity, 4, 5, maybe 6 times. Then each time, you know, it gets better, and it gets a little better, and it gets a little better. And you don't want to send anything out. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is sending out material before it's finished. There is no such thing as a bad screenplay, only an unfinished one. And this is something I believe, truly believe, just as strongly as I believe about writing. You know, you got to write badly with pride, or you're never going to write anything. It's, you know, you have to allow yourself to do that. But I think any idea for a screenplay that is conflict-based, you know, this is the essential. It has to be conflict-based. But any idea for a screenplay that is conflict-based can be made to work. It can. And bad screenplays, if they contain some conflict, they can all be made to work. It's just that they're sent out before they're finished. And when you send something out before it's really finished, you really only get one good shot at it. You know, you kind of burn it up. And a lot of good ideas have gone to the idea cemetery because of making that move. For a long time, for years, before I became a professor here, while I was still a full-time screenwriter, I was teaching at UCLA Extension Writers Program, which is the largest such writing program in the world, and it's really great. Really good people teach there. And it was a way to get out of the house one night a week, you know, out of my room, out of my office. And I was working with people who were really bright and really talented in various and sundry ways. They, you know, great characters, warm, three-dimensional, super dialogue that just kind of crackles and pops. But when they finally turned in their final project at the end of the quarter, I guess, quarter system there, and I read their scripts, they just laid there. They were flat. The story wasn't happening or going anywhere. They would have 3 or 4 events and then try to stretch that out over, you know, 110 pages or however the whole screenplay would be. And I gave them the books, we read the books, we went over it, you know, the structure over and over, the classic structure, and Joseph Campbell and all of that. And yet when they sat down to write it, it just somehow didn't gel into a concept or command of screen story structure. And screenwriting is screen story structure more than it is anything else, right? So I went looking for, you know, as people do, for patterns. There had to be a way to teach story construction, not to the exclusion of all else, but focus only on finding an objectified way to teach story construction. This is how you build a house. Board 1, you know, that kind of stuff. And I looked at, you know, hundreds and hundreds of films. And yes, I began to see a pattern that I hadn't heard anybody talk about before or mention before or hadn't read about before. And then I kind of codified it, put it together as a paradigm, and cleaned up the questions that it raised, kind of stuff. And I kept looking, and I began more and more convinced, and then I did I set out to prove myself wrong. I mean, this I thought was a real important step. So I went back searching through movies that had been hit movies that had emotionally affected audiences all over the world from pretty far back. I went far back as 1929. Buster Keaton, The General. I don't know if you ever saw it. It was one of his last, if not his last, silent film. It is, something of a masterpiece of the silent era. Same thing. The same beats, the same moment, the same sequences, accomplishing the same stuff. So I codified it and began to teach it in the grad courses. People were rather cynical about such a thing to begin with. But what I found out over a few years of working on codifying it, simplifying it, packaging it in a way that was understandable and useful as a tool, because that's what it is. It's just a tool, and darn good one, useful one too. One by one, I won them all over, and I proved it. Yes, it's true, and it was like an interesting experience for all of us. Because again, it is about discovery. Now, just let me try this, okay, for just a few minutes. One of the single most important aspects of screenwriting, any long-form narrative, even novel writing too, but just screenwriting in particular, is change. Thus, everything in the story must keep changing as it flows. It has to be different 5-10 minutes from now than what the circumstances were previously 10 minutes ago. It has to keep changing. And I came to believe there had to be a pattern of change. And what I discovered was this. This gets a little numeric, stick with me for this, because it's important and I think enormously useful. 3 acts, okay, in a screenplay, you've got 3 acts. First act. In Act 1, I noticed, there are 6 sequences following one another that I came to call hero goal sequences. Here's the definition for a hero goal sequence. A hero goal sequence is any 2 to 7 page section of your screenplay in which and through which your hero or heroine pursues one short-term goal, physical short-term goal, only one, as one step toward achieving the overall story goal, right? Just that little piece of it. And at the end of that 7 or so, nothing is exact, but 7 or so pages, something happened or some discovery is made by this hero that I call fresh news. In other words, they turn up something that was unknown by them and by us, by the audience, about what they are doing, that puts an end to that current single goal and offers up a new short-term physical single goal to be pursued in the next step. And that there are 6 of these hero goal sequences, 6 little individual pursuits of individual specific goals in the entirety of Act 1, and what we call, there's many names for this, plot point 1, there's the first major turning point, that kind of thing. I call it stunning surprise 1. When stunning surprise 1 happens, which ends Act 1 officially and dramatically, ends Act 1 and kicks the hero forward, tumbling head over heel into Act 2, I call it stunning surprise 1 because that it should be, I believe, the emotional impact on both the hero and the audience. It needs to be emotional and it needs to be impactful, not abstract. That always happens in hero goal sequence 6. Always. And it continues. In the first half of the second act, there are 6 more hero goal sequences. And hero goal sequence number 12 always contains the midpoint sequence. That's a separate discussion. The midpoint is a fascinating part of movies that work, and it's rich and layered with things that go on relative to character growth and relative to the plot being, you know, bumped up to the next level and all. But it always happens in number 12. In the second half of Act 2, there are 6 more. Wonder of wonders. There are 6 more hero goal sequences, and hero goal sequence 18 always contains Stunning Surprise 2. Not 17, not 19, 18 in every movie that works for audiences. In other words, every hit movie that you can analyze because it's doing something right, this is the pattern. And then in Act 3, it's the only act where it can vary, where the numbers can vary. And in Act 3, you have between 2 and 5 hero goal sequences. I don't recommend 5. 5 is... Good movies have been made with 5, like As Good as It Gets, which happens to be, you know, one of my favorite romantic comedies, kind of stuff. It has 5 hero goal sequences in a rather extended Act 3. But the audience is getting antsy, and it's time to get out by then. The standard, the average of movies that work is 21 hero goal sequences. 18 for Acts 1 and 2, and then another 3 in Act 3. This is a way, I know it sounds kind of weird and mathematical at this point, but this is a way of quantifying change. It tells you in advance, this must happen in these few pages. It also goes beyond that. I mean, people were asking, you know, well, and what specifically happens in each one of these? Can you nail that down? In a general way, yeah, I do that in the book. You know, I say, well, these things usually happen in hero goal sequence number 4, you know, that kind of stuff. But that's up for grabs and up for people to play with. But structurally, the bones are these 20 to 23 hero goal sequences laid out in this exact way, and they don't change. You have to get used to the system you have. For instance, back in my day, there was one way into Hollywood, TV, film, one way, and that was through an agent's front door. And that agent's front door had layers and layers of guardians before it. And that was also frustrating, you know, in a similar way, but very, very frustrating to get in. But now what you have a more creative path, let me put it this way. Contests, screenwriting contests have now been around long enough to separate the wheat from the chaff. You know, the good ones, year after year, have gotten stronger because, you know, more people believe in them, and the less good ones, although they're all sincere, I know they're all sincere, have kind of fallen by the wayside. But the test is this. Every time I hear that, I mean, yes, I have great sympathy for that. I understand that. I remember when I was coming up myself and what it felt like, and it was infuriating and frustrating. But the number one reason why you are not making it is the material is not yet good enough. Because if you're not, especially if you're not reading, you know, reading the stuff that's out there, you have no way of knowing how good has to be in order to get noticed. And coming in, you have to be better than most of the people who are now making a living at it in order to get noticed, even. But the contests offer, you know, when I was talking about re-objectification, the contests offer a concrete way to do that. Work on it and work on it and work on it until you've got something you're ready to test. But now, pick your contests carefully. The first time you try it out, pick smaller contests, you know, more fringy. I mean, do your research. They should be decent, upstanding contests and so forth. Try it out. Try it out. Did you make the quarterfinals, or were you swept away, you know, in the first pass through? Okay, if that happens, you have learned something. It's not ready. And you keep working on it, and you keep working on it. And finally, when you get to the mid-level ranks, and let's say it gets your script gets to the quarterfinals, okay, but it did not make the top 10 or top 15, fine, you've learned something more. Go back, take a vacation for a couple of weeks, try not to think about it, then read it again, make more notes, and go back to work on it. And it is a way to, that's the thing, see, what a lot of neophyte screenwriters, new screenwriters, don't do or don't pursue, which is, you have got to be, as a writer, as a craftsperson, you must be relentless in your goal of creating quality material. Number one, not enough story. Again, it's that old thing. Characters can be wonderful, dialogue can be sparkling and even funny as heck. But if the story lays there just flat as a pancake, that story is not going anywhere. It's a weak story. Number two would be passive central character. That has killed more scripts than just about anything I've ever seen. And weak story and passive central character, they go together. They really go to fit together too. A passive central character is a hero or heroine, the lead down the middle, who doesn't really do anything. And life and the story happen to them. They do not happen to anything or anyone. And that is a one way to put your audience to sleep very, very quickly. Heroes have to be active. The hero is the audience. You build a story so that the hero is, with lots of flaws and everything, fine, yes, make them human, but they have certain qualities, character, of character and of circumstance. They have to be brave. That is absolutely essential. But you can put them in, unfair injury. We care about people who are being unjustly dealt with. They're in a situation of danger. They're funny. They have a sense of humor. That always helps. Loved by other people. There is this kind of list of things you can do to keep characters interesting. That allows us to like them, and once we start seeing the nature of the hero or heroine's major problem and the major impossible task before them, hopefully on about page 6 or 8, we, the audience becomes one person, each of us sitting alone, and we project ourselves, psychologically project ourselves into the hero, and then we're along for the ride. And if that hero doesn't do anything or doesn't want anything, and other people do all this stuff, and all the people that come in, all the secondary characters are the witty, fun, urbane, loquacious, and and joking and funny. They're all the funny characters, while basically your central character is more or less wallpaper. It's dead, and that is related to something else, which is the adversary. When that happens in a script, almost always the problem is there is no adversary, or there is no powerful adversary. Adversary is so critical. People need to work on their adversary until it is. The adversary should be the strongest person in the story. When I was coming up, you say, oh, they have to be equal. They have to be equal in power to the hero. No, they have to be much more powerful than the hero. It has to look, for most of the movie, it has to look like the hero has no bloody way of defeating this adversary or surmounting the problems being presented by this adversary. But they do it. They outthink them, and they out-try them and drive, and they can make it happen. And that's a story with great conflict, with a hero who is doing things, who sucks us in emotionally, that we can ride along happily for the journey. And that's how the good ones work. which that's probably more than 2. I threw in, made that 3 or 4. But the third, I think I would say, is getting it out there too soon.
Okay.
That's what destroys most screenplays. It's hard, writing a screenplay, a feature-length screenplay. Heavens, that's hard, really hard. And it's not necessarily all pleasant undertaking, labor. It hurts. You tear your hair out. You pound your head against the wall, sometimes literally. And but finally you got a draft. Oh, God, I did it. Here it is. Here it is. I'm going to get it out quickly as I can. And that's the time of great danger. You can't just send it out. It is not ready. Guaranteed it is not ready. Long, long time ago, in a land far away, and I was a struggling screenwriter, and I was cranking out original material. That was my thing. I figured the only way I could make I wasn't, a pusher and a pounder and a yeller, and the only way I was going to make myself inevitable was to keep writing and make myself inevitable through a pile of good to great scripts. And that's pretty much the path I took. And I had a great idea about a war that took place at the very beginning of the Civil War. It was an Alan Pinkerton story. And I pitched it all over town. I had a good agent at the time, pitched it all over. I said, yeah, good story. We don't want it. We don't make, at the moment, the word was, we don't make historical pictures. At that time, they were very expensive. Hey, costumes. Hey, sets, locations, means, moolah. So I said, fine, and then my agent advised me to move. Okay, fine, now we know, move on. And I said, give me a couple of months, because I'm going to write this anyway. I really like this story. I think this is a really good story, and I want to write it. He said, you're nuts, but okay. So I wrote it, and I really liked it. And we tried it again in script form, and got the same response. Nobody wanted to do it. And I said, okay, but I know in my heart it's a good script. So I put it away. It was, I forget exactly, but 8 or 9 years later, a producer, a very charming, sweet producer by the name, Wendy Deitman was her name. She calls me up and says, Eric, that Civil War thing you had, do you still have that? Is that available? Is it available? She said, could you send that over? At that time, she was working at TNT. I was producing with another, very strong producer at TNT. And at TNT, it was TNT that brought back the epic, the historical epic. That's part of what they were interested. I guess he was interested in, that kind of material or something. So I sent it over, and within, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks, we had a deal, and within 18 or 20 weeks, they were in pre-production. And it's one of the ones of my originals that got made.
So how did they have a copy of the script again? I'm sorry. You had sent it out, but she wasn't there.
She didn't have a copy. Yeah. She only remembered it. She remembered it. She had read the whole script back in the day.
And she was somewhere else?
Yeah, she was somewhere else
okay.
and doing something else. But I guess the point here for screenwriters everywhere is all of your original material has a shelf life. It's not that you give it a shot, everybody says no, and you contemplate suicide, and you put it in the closet and carry on, right? That's not it. The cycles of what they are willing to purchase or option or consider actually making, the cycles keep changing. At one point, nobody would touch a historical epic with a 10-foot pole, and some years later, there was somebody looking for one. And my career, during those years, 23 years, whatever it was, my career as a screenwriter went around 3 times. Hot to cold, 3 times, 3 full times. And every single time when things were cooling down, things sometimes that had nothing to do with me, you know, a project goes bad and you happen to be associated with it, or it had something to do with it, and then it splashes over on you, people cool for a while. Every single time, the way I got back in the game was with a new original screenplay. That's your line of defense. You can't be lazy. You cannot be lazy. You must continually be working on original material. A really bad habit that most screenwriters have is they got a great idea and they're cooking and they just start writing screenplay. I'm writing screenplay pages. Oh boy. And it's fun, but it's going nowhere ultimately without a plan and a very well thought out. The hard work is in the outline, and it has to be a very complete outline. And you have to have confidence that all story problems have been addressed. So the first thing you have to do is the dirty work, the outline. Write yourself. I would say hero goal sequences because I happen to think it and I happen to know that it works. But however, you know, beat sheet, however they do it, have a very complete outline. And then good bloody luck. It's a lot of work. And then I would also say, yeah, you write it on a little piece of paper and tape it above your desk. Write badly with pride. No writer's block. None. Just write badly with pride. Write a piece of junk. You know, if you're just sitting there staring at the wall for an hour, okay. What would you write if you were just really writing trash, really writing garbage? Go for it. Because you never know when the real ideas, the depth of what you are doing will be sparked. You just don't know. You don't know. Just when you think maybe you aren't so good. And this happens. Oh, we all go in cycles. Yeah, this should be mentioned too. I mean, you know, up one day and down the next day suicidal. I mean, this is art. This is writers. You know, welcome to the club on that big wheel. The emotional journey of what it is, what we do. But you are also learning whether this art form is for you or not along the way. Are you in for the long haul? That's the only question you need to keep asking yourself. Am I getting enough food out of this, enough creative food and juice and sense of, you know, that growing sense of command, incremental command of a much to be respected craft that can be quite intricate. That I'm hooked, that this is what I need. I mean, it has been said that, you know, for writers, it hurts more not to do it than to do it. Are you up for a lifetime of all the range of emotions you are going to be going through as a writer, as an artist? Is this what you want to do, really? You want to be an artist? That's great. But understand that it is not the simple and easy choice to make in life. Quite the contrary. But it is a fabulous, fabulous journey, unlike any other, I think.